Emilio Fernandez. Today I will be presenting on the moral distinction, violence in video games versus real life. We live in an era where digital entertainment is often blamed for societal issues. My goal today is to look past the headlines and the panic to answer a fundamental question. Does the morality we display in a video game reflect our morality in the real world? Or, as I believe, is there a distinct line between the two that we often ignore? To start, I want to clarify my position. I chose this topic because there is a pervasive argument in our culture that virtual actions have real world consequences. However, my thesis is this: I believe that there is a fine line when it comes to morals in video games versus morals in real world. Those who play violent games shouldn't be looked at or held to a higher standard simply because of their digital hobbies. In this presentation, I will cover three main areas. 1. The distinction between simulation and reality, specifically looking at intent and consent. 2. The lack of correlation between gaming and real world behavioral issues. And lastly, the cognitive benefits of gaming that we often ignore. Let's look at the context. In today's world, video games are everywhere. They include violence ranging from a cartoonish slap in a simulation game to realistic combat in a war game. Growing up, I remember being told constantly that violent games would rot my brain or make me act out. Yet I continued playing, and neither I nor my friends turned into criminals or gangsters or anything of the sort. The reality is that for millions of people, the line between game and reality isn't fuzzy, it's actually very clear. However, the public perception has not caught up. We still see a culture that fears gaming is eroding our moral fiber, but as we'll see, the data and the philosophy suggests otherwise. To understand the ethics of this, I looked at our required reading by Marcus Skolsk, titled Defending the Morality of Video Games. Skolsk provides a crucial benchmark for the argument. He argues that for an action to be quote unquote immoral, it usually requires two things: a victim who is harmed and a violation of consent. In a video game, neither exist. No one is actually hurt, and the victims are lines of code that cannot refuse consent. Skolsk's work is essential because it challenges the idea that simulation equals endorsement. Just because I simulate a crime in a game does not mean I endorse the crime in reality. The moral weight is fundamentally different because the consequences are non existent. Expanding on Skolsk, we can look at this through Kantian ethics. Kant focuses heavily on intent. When a player shoots a character in a game, their intent is not, I want to kill a human being. Their intent is, I want to score points, or I want to progress the story. There is a concept in game studies often called magic circle, a space where rules of the real world are suspended. Inside this circle, we engage in what is called moral disengagement. We know it's fake, we know it's a game, therefore, the moral rules of reality do not apply in the same way. But what happens when games give us a choice? I looked at a study by Schaefer, 2012, regarding moral choices in video games. Interestingly, research shows that when given a choice in a game to be good or evil, many players actually choose the path that aligns with their real world values. Even when they do choose the evil path, they recognize that it's a fictional exploration and not a lifestyle change. This supports my thesis that there is no direct corruption of the player's soul. Enjoying a game mechanic is separate from enjoying the suffering of a living being. Next, we are going to talk about no correlation to behavior, or the most common criticism that video games cause violence. My second major argument is that there is simply no consistent correlation between play and behavior. The argument that games cause crime relies on a flawed analogy. It assumes that pressing a button to punch an avatar is neurologically the same as punching a person. It is not. We also see failed causation. If video games were a direct cause of violence, we would expect to see crime rates skyrocket as video game sales have exploded over the last 20 years. Instead, in many parts of the world, youth violence has actually decreased while game popularity has peaked. The data just does not match the fear. In fact, while we focus on the negatives, we often ignore the positives. My third argument is that video games, even violent ones, can lead to superior cognitive abilities. Researched by Burlett, Anderson, and Swing in 2009 notes that gamers often outperform non-gamers in cognitive tests. We see better reaction times, better spatial awareness, and improved problem-solving skills. Crucially, these benefits are often independent of their genre. A fast-paced shooter game requires high-level processing. It's ironic that the very game labeled as brain rot are actually training our brains to process information faster. Now, I must address the opposition. It would be dishonest to say that there is no research supporting the other side. Many research, including those cited in the Bartlett Review, argue that the link between violent game exposure and aggression is a confirmed effect, quote unquote. They point to studies showing that after playing violent games, individuals show increased psychological arousal, higher heart rates, and higher aggressive thoughts. They argue that repeated exposure leads to desensitization, making us less empathetic to real world pain. However, I believe this interpretation is flawed. While it's true these games increase arousal or excitement, arousal is not the same as aggression. A fast-paced game makes your heart beat faster, yes, but does the elevated heart rate translate to you wanting to hurt someone? The evidence there is just very inconsistent. The debate is currently deadlocked because while lab results show increased feelings of aggression, real-world statistics do not show increased acts of criminal violence. We have to differentiate between feeling pumped after a match and actually becoming a violent person. The transition from one to the other is simply not supported by the data. Why does this matter? Because the blame placed on video games has real consequences. It's destroying the public perception of an entire artistic medium. It creates a stigma where gamers are viewed with suspicion. More importantly, it distracts us. We blame a video game for a tragedy. When we blame a game for a tragedy, we stop looking at the real root of violence, such as mental health or social environment. We are scapegoating a hobby rather than solving the problem. To conclude, I hope I have shown that the panic surrounding video games is largely unfounded. We established that without real-world intent or harm, virtual actions are not immoral. We also showed there is no causal link between playing games and committing crimes. And lastly, we highlighted that these games can actually improve cognitive function. Gamers should not be held to a higher standard than anyone else. We can distinguish between fantasy on the screen and the reality of the world around us. Thank you. Here are the sources cited throughout the presentation. Also, sources used for research while making the presentation itself. Additional research, I mean.